The tuna industry's $10 billion lie. It's not dolphin-safe. The crew freezes. A wall of silver bodies thrashes inside the net, and above them, dolphins sprint the surface, frantic breaths cutting the air. Someone shouts to back down. Another points at a can in the galley stamped Dolphin-Safe. On deck, hesitation hangs heavier than the weight of the catch. A headline flashes in memory, consumers misled by the label. If it says safe, why are dolphins still dying? The stakes aren't small. $10 billion of tuna, our trust in that blue oval, and the health of a living ocean. To understand the promise, we have to rewind before cans, before collateral. The birth of canned tuna. Long before tuna became a pantry habit, America ate sardines. Cannery whistles blew along the west coast, factory lines clattered in Monterey and San Pedro, and only little fish fueled workers through wars and recessions. Then the sardines crashed. Whether it was overfishing, regime shifts, or both, the boats came back light and the canneries stared down empty belts. Survival meant switching species. They turned to albacore and soon after skipjack. The meat was pale, mild, forgiving in a casserole, easy on a child's palate, but fish didn't sell themselves, so marketers tried a simple translation, chicken of the sea. It worked. Tuna stopped being a coastal specialty and became a national staple. Sandwiches in school lunches, tuna melts in diners, protein for pennies, one can at a time, a new industry took shape. Catching enough fish to feed a continent required scale. Handlines and small nets gave way to industrial gears. Long lines stretched like highways, baited with thousands of hooks. Purse-Seines cinched around entire schools with a drawstring of steel. Factories moved offshore, freezers got bigger, brine tanks colder, and the ocean shrank in corporate imaginations into grids and quotas. The United States played its part with tariffs that favored domestic processing and subsidies that kept fleets modern. Out of the tangle of boats and brands emerged what buyers learned to trust as the big three: Starkist, Bumble Bee, and Chicken of the Sea. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the eastern tropical Pacific. Tuna, especially yellowfin, often swam beneath herds of dolphins there. The association wasn't new to fishermen, but the industrial era turned it into strategy. Spot dolphins, find tuna. The logic was simple, the results were explosive. Helicopters lifted off from decks, spotting black backs and white splashes from miles away. Speedboats peeled off, slapping the water with ropes and paddles, herding the animals as a wall of net unfurled in a vast circle. The net closed. The tuna were trapped, so were the dolphins. On paper, the technique was a breakthrough. In practice, it meant chaos at the surface, panic underwater, and air-breathing mammals held down by a nylon curtain. Crews learned the backdown maneuver, reversing the boat to sink the net at one end so dolphins could scramble out. It helped sometimes. Sometimes it didn't. In the rush to hit bonuses and fill wells before a rival boat arrived, decisions tilted toward speed, not care. Back home, nobody was talking about dolphins. In the early decades, bycatch was just part of the business. If someone asked, they heard a tired line: "Nothing's perfect, it's the price of protein." The canners focused on shelf life and recipe ideas. Advertisers sold convenience and health. Behind the image, fleets kept growing, chasing fish farther from shore, hopping licenses across flags, and refining a machine that turned wild pelagic animals into predictable product. The rise wasn't only technological, it was political. Tariffs protected processors. Trade deals opened new supplies. Government scientists standardized grades and weights. A can became a promise: 12 ounces of reliable calories with a tidy label and no bones. The companies competed on price and marketing muscle, not on what happened at sea. The cost of a can was trimmed into everything that didn't show up on a supermarket shelf. Crew culture adapted to the pressure. Captains were paid to find fish fast. Helicopter pilots were the heroes of the chase. Net bosses kept a ledger of tiers and repairs like a scorecard. The clock ran on diesel and ice. Every hour mattered, every set tallied, every hold filled meant easier meetings with buyers and fewer arguments with bankers. If dolphins pointed to tuna, then dolphins became a compass needle. What nobody outside the wheelhouse knew was how thin the margin could feel. Weather turned in minutes. A net snagged on a prop. A backdown failed. Somebody misjudged the angle of the swell. In the logbook, it was just a number. In the water, it was lungs burning and a frantic search for air. This industrial sprint didn't happen in a vacuum. As Americans built their habit of tuna salad, Japanese sashimi demand reshaped distant seas, and European fleets brought their own methods to the tropics. Globalization stitched everything together. A fish caught in the Pacific could be brined on a carrier, cooked in Thailand, canned in American-owned plants, and stacked in a Kansas warehouse. The origin story blurred, so did the accountability. Yet for years, the system held because the story on the label was simple and true enough. Cheap, tasty, safe to eat. Nobody asked safe for whom. The industry didn't volunteer the answer. It was easier to focus on the cans marching past the inspectors, the coupons in Sunday circulars, the annual earnings calls. When sardines vanished, tuna filled the gap and then some. When consumers asked for convenience, the brands delivered. When regulators wanted standard weights and sanitary plants, the companies complied. Quiet omission, what it took to catch the fish in the first place, stayed offshore. It would have stayed there longer if not for a camcorder that found its way onto a deck and into living rooms. But that comes later. For now, the stage is set, an industry built on a pivot from scarcity to abundance, from local to global, from handwork to machinery. The technique that made profits explode didn't just catch tuna. It put dolphins in the crosshairs, then taught crews how to work around the sight of it. The can in your pantry grew out of that pivot. The recipe on its label, mayo, celery, a squeeze of lemon, covers a lineage of choices. Some were smart, some were inevitable. One would soon become impossible to ignore. The Purse-Seine Revolution on dolphins. To understand how the label was born, you have to stand on a steel deck in the eastern tropical Pacific when the lookout yells, "Dolphins, 11 o'clock!" That call meant money. Yellowfin ride under spotted and spinner dolphins here, a quirk of ecology that became a business model. The faster a boat could find dolphins, the sooner it could set and the quicker the wells would fill. Helicopters made it surgical. Pilots skimmed the horizon, calling out splashes and backs, while skiffs, pengas with oversized engines, peeled off to herd the herd. The main vessel unfurled a curtain of net a mile long, corks popping on the surface, lead line sinking like a drawstring around an entire living circle. The speedboat slapped the water with chickens, wooden rattles, and cut inside the loop to push the animals tighter. The dolphins sprinted, the tuna stayed below. Then the skiff tossed the end of the net back to the ship, and the winches hummed. The ocean became a bag. Here, where crews gambled. To keep dolphins alive, they used a backdown maneuver, engines in reverse, a deep V forming as the net sank low at the stern. In that gap, dolphins could slip over. It looked clean from the air. In the water, it was chaos, bodies tangled in webbing, calves separated, animals panicking as the mesh billowed and twisted. Some sets saved most of them. Some didn't. In the rush, every extra minute meant tuna escaping under the net or a rival boat closing in. Bonuses hinged on sets, not rescues. What nobody on land saw in those early years was the scale. Over decades, mortality estimates reached into the millions in the region, a staggering number that reduced wild, social mammals to a line item called incidental take. It wasn't incidental, it was baked into the technique. The boats weren't setting near dolphins, they were setting on them. Crew culture formed around speed. Helicopter pilots were paid to find life quickly. Net bosses earned their reputation on tight, fast purses. Engineers kept the hydraulics hot. A torn panel cost hours. A botched backdown cost fish and face. On bad days, the lead line snagged, the net folded, and air breathers were forced under by the fabric and the weight of their own instinct to flee. Men shouted from skiffs, knives flashed to cut mesh, and a brown sea turned white with foam and breath. Meanwhile, back at the cannery, planners forecast tonnage and ad buyers booked TV spots. The link between a well filled with yellowfin and a lunchbox sandwich was just math. Out at sea, it was improvisation under pressure. The boats grew bigger, the nets deeper, and electronics turned the hunt into data, sonar blips, GPS trails, a pilot's voice crackling over a deck speaker. "They're running south, stay on them, set now." A handful of captains tried to change the rhythm, longer backdowns, more careful purses, extra skiff time to tease dolphins toward the escape. It helped when crews weren't exhausted, when the sea was flat, when there wasn't a storm building on the horizon. But those were the exceptions. The system rewarded catches, not caution. Insurance paid for gear, not for time lost easing mammals out of a bag. This wasn't just a Pacific story. Success in the ETP influenced technique everywhere. Purse-Seines chased pelagic fish, but the dolphin-tuna bond was strongest here, and the fleets concentrated where that bond gave them an edge. Multi-boat operations learned to coordinate like a pit crew. Spot, circle, close, back down, braille the tuna aboard in a silver river. Reset, do it again. The numbers brought confidence. The boats could predict yields, the canneries could promise supply, and the brands could sell certainty. The dead stayed at sea, recorded if at all in logs no consumer would read. The only people watching were crews, a few managers, and eventually the first scientists and observers invited aboard under limited programs. Even then, intimidation and silence were common currencies. Data that challenged the pace was unwelcome. At home, diners ordered tuna melts and kids ate triangles of white bread, mayo, and fish. No one in a grocery aisle could see a spinner dolphin twirling at the surface, exhausted as mesh tightened around its chest. No one could hear the winch straining or feel the deck tilt as a set went sideways. The technique delivered volume. It also turned air into the most dangerous resource on deck. The industry framed it as progress, a method that found tuna efficiently in a planet-sized ocean. And strictly speaking, it did, but efficiency had a cost measured in breaths. The quiet truth was that a thriving market for convenient protein ran through circles of net thrown around animals that need to breathe, circles that closed faster than a living body could think. That contradiction couldn't stay offshore forever. The first camcorder that recorded a backdown Breaking Bad would carry those breaths into American living rooms, and once people saw it, they'd never unsee it. The footage that changed dinner. The tape starts with wind over an open deck and a shaky zoom on a boiling patch of ocean. You hear the winch before you see the net, then the frame catches a dorsal fin, then another, then the frantic splash of a spinner dolphin rolling at the mesh. Someone swears. The camera jerks wide. A voice says, back down, but the line is already tight. In the 1980s, a handful of activists and sympathetic crew brought camcorders aboard Purse-Seiners in the eastern tropical Pacific. The gear was clunky and fragile. The footage they took was worse. You see the net purse into a dark green bowl, the corkline lifted like a fence, and dolphins stacked against it, wide eyes cutting through glare. A skiff races by, men banging paddles to open a lane. One dolphin slips over the lead line. Another doesn't. Get this, none of this was meant for prime time. Early screenings happened in church basements and high school auditoriums. The sound systems buzzed. People had to squint at projection screens pulled tight with masking tape. It didn't matter. Moms covered kids' eyes. Grown men stared at their shoes. A woman in the third row asked out loud, "Is this my tuna sandwich?" Then local TV grabbed it. Producers needed B-roll to anchor a story about Dolphin-Safe tuna, a term that hadn't yet been defined. They ran segments during the evening news, helicopter shots of circling nets, grainy close-ups of dolphins underwater, the desperate, awkward ballet of a backdown that almost works. Phones at grocery headquarters lit up. Buyers at school districts called. A few chains announced they'd pause purchases until suppliers explained what was actually happening offshore. Meanwhile, a different kind of camera rolled in Washington and San Diego, press conferences with activists flanking blown-up stills from the tapes. They framed the issue simply. Tuna companies could choose not to set nets on dolphins. It sounded obvious to anyone who hadn't priced fuel, gear, or time. To families in the cereal aisle, it sounded like a reasonable demand. The big three were suddenly on defense. Their public relations teams had spent decades selling convenience. Now they were fielding questions that convenience couldn't answer. How many dolphins die to fill a can? Do you know? Can you prove it? The brands tested talking points, improvements to the backdown, new rescue techniques, better training, but the images kept playing. You can argue with statistics. You can't argue with a calf pinned under mesh as its mother circled. School cafeterias became ground zero. Superintendents didn't want angry parents at board meetings. They swapped tuna for turkey. Orders fell. In a margin business, that hurt. College food co-ops posted signs, "No dolphin sets." Activists staged supermarket demonstrations with cardboard nets around shopping carts, staffers handing out VHS tapes like they were flyers. Inside the companies, a calculus shifted. Even if mortality rates dropped in certain fleets, the public image didn't. Advertisers got skittish. A daytime talk show host held up a can and asked, "Is this killing dolphins?" The camera cut to a mother in the audience shaking her head. The brands could see the next quarter's sales curve flattening. Here's where strategy bends. Rather than fight the footage, one company tried to outrun it. In April 1990, Starkist announced a pledge: no tuna caught by setting nets on dolphins. They said they'd require written guarantees from their suppliers and cut off anyone who didn't comply. It wasn't a law, it was a market rule. Within days, Bumble Bee and Chicken of the Sea followed. Buyers cheered. Activists claimed a victory. The term Dolphin-Safe left the church basement and landed on the side of a can. But a label is a promise with fine print, and the footage had primed the country to hear a single word, safe, as absolute. The reality at sea was messier. The press conferences ended. The VHS tapes kept circulating, a visual memory that turned dinner into a decision. The industry had just drawn a line. What that line actually covered would define the next decade. Defining Dolphin-Safe. The pledge sounded clean: no tuna caught by setting nets on dolphins. Starkist said it first in 1990, then Bumble Bee and Chicken of the Sea matched it within days. Buyers wanted a bright line. The companies gave them one. They sent letters to fleets, demanded signed assurances, and told consumers the words they needed at the shelf. Dolphin-Safe entered the language before anyone wrote the law. To lock the promise, Congress stepped in. The Dolphin Protection Consumer Information Act, DPCIA, enacted in 1990, gave the label legal teeth. It didn't force companies to stop certain fishing methods, but it made one thing clear: if you use the words Dolphin-Safe, you'd better meet a standard. At its core, the standard said two things: no intentional sets on dolphins, no observed dolphin deaths or serious injuries in the sets that supplied the tuna. If dolphins weren't the target and didn't die in the process, the king could carry the badge. On paper, it looked like the campaign's goal in statute. In practice, it was a precise definition designed to fit a global supply chain. The law recognized regions. In the eastern tropical Pacific, where setting on dolphins was the method, verification required more: government observers and logs to back claims. Outside the ETP, where fleets rarely chased dolphins directly, the standard leaned on captains' statements for proof, unless national programs put observers aboard. The blue oval on the can didn't mean every fish had been witnessed from hook to hold. It meant the company's paperwork matched the law's criteria. There was a second quiet truth. Dolphin-Safe never meant zero impact. The statute didn't promise that no dolphin ever died in a fishery that supplied a brand, only that the tuna in that can wasn't harvested by intentionally setting on dolphins, and if observed, wasn't from a set where dolphins died. The distinction mattered at sea but evaporated in a grocery aisle. The word safe felt absolute to shoppers. The law's language was anything but. Meanwhile, companies turned voluntary standards into market gates. Retailers wrote contracts that required the label. Importers demanded certificates. A processor might buy from multiple fleets, some fishing in the ETP under more stringent rules, others working the Western and Central Pacific with minimal observer coverage. As long as each batch's documents aligned, the brand's claim held. Auditors reviewed forms, shipping lots, transshipment log. The system created a paper trail that could be checked if someone knew where to look and had the authority to look hard. There were real improvements. In the ETP, intentional sets on dolphins fell where buyers enforced the pledge. Backdown techniques improved. Release teams got training. Mortality dropped from the peak years when millions of dolphins died. But pressure didn't vanish, it shifted. If a skipper couldn't set on dolphins without risking a market cutoff, he had to find tuna another way or fish another region. Outside the ETP, the fastest alternative was drifting on fish aggregating devices, FADs that drew schools under rafts and buoys. Those sets kept the label intact because they didn't target dolphins. The bycatch story would come later. Activists split over the compromise baked into the definition. Some argued the label should signal zero dolphin harm, period, no matter the fishery. Others said the campaign's core ask was met: stop setting nets on dolphins. The legal architects tried to thread the needle, credible enough to change behavior in the worst hot spot, flexible enough to avoid banning an entire method worldwide. Industry lawyers pushed to keep the scope narrow. Consumer lawyers pushed to keep the promise plain. The enforcement piece exposed a structural flaw. The label rode on visibility. Where observers watched, violations could be flagged. Where observers were rare or absent, captains' declarations and company assurances filled the gap. Government agencies could spot-check imports, inspect records, and investigate complaints, but they couldn't watch every set on the high seas. The law acknowledged that limit and built a standard around what could be verified. The gap between what could be verified and what actually happened at sea became the place where trust lived or died. Dolphin-Safe wasn't a universal conservation plan. It was a consumer information regime with a targeted behavioral aim: break the reliance on setting nets around dolphins in the ETP and let buyers choose cans that didn't come from that practice. The label did that. It also created a powerful halo effect. A shopper saw safe and relaxed. A school district saw the oval and resumed orders. The brands kept their market. The ocean kept its trade-off. The promise on the can was clearer than the truth in the water. And because markets hate friction, the definition hardened into habit. The can moved, the story soothed. the question shifted from "are dolphins dying in this set" to "can we prove they did?" That difference would matter as trade fights and court cases tried to stretch, narrow, and redefine a single word that carried the weight of a movement. Tuna, trade, and the Panama Deal. While the label settled into U.S. supermarkets, another fight started far from the canned goods aisle. Customs agents began turning away tuna from fleets that still set on dolphins. The U.S. embargo was blunt. If your boats chased dolphins in the eastern tropical Pacific, your tuna couldn't enter American shelves, no matter the ad campaign. Mexico, Venezuela, and others saw red. Their boats had fished yellowfin this way for decades. To them, the embargo looked less like conservation and more like protectionism wearing a green mask. They didn't just grumble, they went to Geneva. Under GATT, the trade body before the WTO, Mexico argued that the United States was using domestic rules to control how other nations fished, then punishing them at the border. Trade law hates that. Countries can regulate what comes in, telling others how to produce it gets dicey. U.S. lawyers countered that consumers deserved truthful labels and that the embargo backed a conservation goal. The courtroom language was dry. The reality was simple: dolphins versus market access. Meanwhile, on the water, fleets faced a squeeze. Some scaled up Dolphin-Safe sets, others diversified away from the ETP. But for nations built around the dolphin set, the American market was still the prize. Losing it hurt. Diplomats shuttled, lawyers drafted, and industry reps counted the days until school district contracts renewed. What came next blurred science, trade, and politics into one deal sheet. In 1995, governments, industry, and some NGOs signed the Panama Declaration. It offered a trade. Instead of banning all dolphin sets, countries would adopt strict mortality caps, require trained observers on ETP Purse-Seiners, and implement specific release techniques. The idea was to manage the risk, not outlaw the method. Set on dolphins if you must, but keep deaths under hard limits and prove it with observer data. In return, pressure would ease on the embargo and disputes would cool. It was a pivot from zero setting to zero or near zero mortality. Back in Washington, Congress adjusted U.S. policy to reflect the deal's spirit, aligning U.S. implementation with the 1995 Declaration and subsequent 1997 International Dolphin Conservation Program Agreement, IDCPA. The administration sought to broaden what Dolphin-Safe could mean, potentially allowing tuna from dolphin sets if certified that no dolphins were killed or seriously injured. Activists split immediately. One camp said lower mortality verified by observers was progress in the place that mattered most. Another called it a rollback that gutted a clear consumer promise. The word safe became a tug-of-war between behavior change and absolute assurance. Courtrooms lit up. Lawsuits argued that any relaxation of the U.S. label would mislead buyers who'd been taught that dolphin-safe meant no dolphin sets, period. Judges weighed agency findings against the tapes that had shaped the public's mind. At the same time, trade panels weighed whether the U.S. label discriminated against Mexican tuna by tying Dolphin-Safe to ETP-specific practices and verification that weren't required elsewhere. The U.S. insisted it standard protected consumers from deception. Mexico framed it as a barrier dressed up as virtue. While briefs flew, the math at sea changed. Observer coverage in the ETP ramped up. Mortality counts fell from the catastrophe years. But the label on a can in Ohio still meant what the buyer thought it meant. No dolphins were chased. The United States tightened verification for all regions after WTO rulings in the 2010s, but this chapter's core tension started here. A domestic promise intersecting a global trade regime that demands even-handedness. Companies navigated around the conflict. Many stuck with the original corporate pledge, no intentional sets on dolphins, because walking it back would torch trust. Others kept options open in non-U.S. markets where local labels didn't carry the same weight. Procurement teams sliced supply by destination. This lot meets U.S. Dolphin-Safe rules. That lot is legal elsewhere. Paper compliance thickened. Shipments were coded by fishery, observer status, and region. The ledger of a promise filtered through customs law. The Panama framework did one big thing right. It put eyes on decks in the ETP and made deaths count. It also did one big thing the market didn't fully grasp. It normalized a managed risk approach to a practice consumers thought had been erased. That gap between management and expectation kept pulling cases back into court and briefs back to Geneva. Inside advocacy groups, arguments got personal. Do you accept a system that allows sets on dolphins under strict limits if it demonstrably reduces deaths? Or do you hold the line that the only honest meaning of Dolphin-Safe is never targeting dolphins at all? The split never fully healed. One side talked about population-level outcomes. The other talked about a shopper's right to a plain reading of a word. The trade fight didn't end in 1997. It evolved. WTO panels later forced the U.S. to refine and equalize its verification rules across regions, not just the ETP, through disputes culminating in key rulings between 2012 and 2019. But the origin of that legal labyrinth sits in the Panama IDCP compromise, mortality limits and monitoring as an alternative to a moral bright line. It cooled embargoes, it ignited semantics, and it left one stubborn question hanging over every can. Whose definition of safe gets to decide what you're told at the shelf? The one crafted in a policy room to balance nations, or the one you thought you were buying when you saw a dolphin on a label? Observers, loopholes, and paper compliance. While lawyers argued over definitions, somebody still had to watch the sets. In the eastern tropical Pacific, the deal put human eyes on deck, government-certified observers riding Purse-Seiners, logging every set, every backdown, every dolphin that surfaced or didn't. Elsewhere, coverage lagged or was voluntary. The label's credibility hinged on these people. So did the industry's ability to say, "We can prove it." Observers weren't hall monitors, they were witnesses. They took biological samples, recorded gear types, noted bycatch species, and flagged violations. On paper, it created a chain of evidence. In reality, it put a single person between a multinational supply chain and the truth. Reports from advocacy groups and academic reviews describe the job as risky, weeks offshore, little backup, and enormous pressure to keep the peace. Some observers reported intimidation, subtle at first, then not. A warning glance at the logbook. A mistake with provisions, a rumor that the sat phone was down. In the worst cases, observers disappeared at sea. Families got silence and condolences, colleagues got the message. Meanwhile, something else was happening across the world's tuna grounds. Outside the ETP, where the label relied on captains' declarations or sparse observer programs, loopholes opened naturally. If the rule says don't set on dolphins, and you're not in a place where dolphins lead you to tuna, compliance becomes a box to check. Tuna caught under drifting fish aggregating devices rarely involves chasing dolphins. A captain signs a certificate, a processor files it, a brand prints a label. Paperwork clean, water dirty. This was the math the system didn't like to say out loud. Low observer coverage plus strong incentives equals blind spots. Electronic monitoring, cameras on board, could fill those gaps, but adoption was slow and oversight often industry-controlled. Where cameras did exist, reviews were limited by time and staffing. A long-line vessel might haul thousands of hooks per set. Watching every minute takes hours. Skipping 10% isn't hard to justify. It's also where a protected species can slip off the record. Inside some fleets, training improved. Release techniques for turtles and sharks got better. Purse-Seine crews practiced Medina panels and fine mesh modifications to reduce entanglement. Circle hooks replaced J-hooks in long lines to cut deep gut hooking. Those were real gains, but the structure still rewarded volume and speed. Observers recorded what they could in a moving, diesel-loud workplace where the people they monitored also kept them safe from storms and accident. Keeping your head down felt like survival, not complicity. According to policy briefs and NGO fieldwork, the intimidation spectrum runs from social pressure to violence. An observer who writes up a non-compliance incident knows it can trigger fines, lost licenses, or a frozen contract upstream. A captain who loses face with an owner knows he's replaceable. Those tensions play out in small moments. A crewman jokes about throwing the log overboard. A set happens at dusk when visibility drops. The brailing starts before the observer can get on the skiff and see what's in the bunt. Later, the log reads no interaction. In the ETP, coverage is the rule, not the exception. That matters. It's why dolphin mortality numbers there are more credible than rumors elsewhere. But even in the ETP, pressure can bend a line. Observers have described being isolated, denied access to radio rooms, or told to stay out of the way during critical moments. Agencies back on land do investigations, but the ocean doesn't preserve a crime scene. A net tears, a dolphin sinks, a signature closes the day. Companies point to audits, chain of custody checks, and certification schemes as reassurance. Some are meaningful. Others are house mirrors, funded, designed, and verified inside the same ecosystem that needs the stamp. The phrase independent review gets stretched. An audit might confirm that a form exists, not that its contents reflect what happened when a line went tight and a protected species came aboard. The more complex the supply chain, transshipments at sea, carrier vessels, ports with light oversight, the easier it is for clean paper to shepherd tainted catch. Meanwhile, electronic monitoring keeps knocking at the door. Trials show that 100% video can catch what 5% human coverage will miss, but cameras without independent review are just another lens pointed the wrong way. The strongest proposals call for third-party analysts, public summaries, and penalties with teeth. They also call for money. Someone has to pay for hours of footage, secure data storage, and the analysts who won't be leaned on by the folks they're reviewing. There's a human cost we rarely discuss. Observers are often young scientists on temporary contracts. They board with ideals and a laptop, then learn the rhythms of a workplace where you don't clock out and the nearest help is a weather window away. In 2020, human rights groups renewed campaigns for observer safety after deaths and disappearances across multiple fisheries. The tuna industry isn't the only culprit, but the stakes are higher where the label's credibility leans on their notes, so the label lives in a tension. In one region, observers and hard rules make the data better, even if imperfect. In others, declarations and low coverage carry the claim. The result is a compliance system that can prove a negative most of the time and miss the exceptions that matter. The ocean doesn't care about paperwork. Dolphins, turtles, and sharks don't either. A can on a shelf does, because without paper it can't be sold. Which brings us to an uncomfortable truth. When Dolphin-Safe became a passport to market, it also became something to game, not always with malice. Often with everyday shortcuts, sets made a little later, logs written a little cleaner, cameras aimed a little high. If you want the promise to mean what people think it means, you have to fund the witnesses, protect them, and check the tape. Otherwise, the label keeps doing what it was designed to do, move cans, while the ocean absorbs the difference. The FAD Trap and the Bycatch Burden. If you take setting on dolphins off the table and still need volume, you chase tuna to where they gather on their own, or where you make them gather. That's the promise of FADs, fish aggregating devices, drifting rafts or anchored rigs that cast a shadow in the open blue. Small fish hide there. Bigger fish come for the buffet. Soon you've got tuna circling PVC, bamboo, palm fronds, plastic sheets, scrap net, whatever floats and holds. From a deck, a good FAD feels like a sure thing. Set the Purse-Seine around the device, close fast, and braille a living spiral into the well. No dolphins in the crosshairs, no backdown chaos, no awkward footage on the evening news. The label stays intact. The math works. Procurement breathes easier. But the ocean keeps its ledger differently. Under a FAD, you don't just catch adult skipjack. You catch juvenile yellowfin and big eye mixed in, fish that haven't spawned yet, the next generation of someone else's dinner. You catch silky sharks that patrol the shade, oceanic whitetips, turtles riding the current, triggerfish, mahi, even rays. The set doesn't discriminate. Deck logs and Regional Tuna Commission reports sketch the outlines. In many non-ETP fisheries, FAD-associated sets drive significantly higher bycatch than sets on free-swimming schools. Juvenile tuna ratios spike. Sharks bleed out on deck while crews hustle to cut them loose. Turtle release kits help when they're used, circle hooks matter on long lines, but Purse-Seines around FADs still fill nets with life that isn't the target. That life is counted sometimes. It's also tossed, dead or dying, back over the side where no shopper sees it. What nobody planned for was the afterlife of the gear. Many FADs are drifting, unmarked, or barely marked. When they break loose, they don't stop being gear. They drift for months, curtains of netting and plastic hanging like ghost limbs. They beach on coral reefs and grind fragile structures into rubble. They snag on seagrass beds, wrap propellers, and wedge into mangroves. In island nations, fishermen find them half buried in sand, a tangle of synthetic rope and mesh that will keep snaring life long after the catch was tallied. Call them ghost FADs. The term fits. From the air, the scale is sobering. Satellite pings from smart buoys dot the tropics. Thousands of devices drift at any time, some tracked, some not, some shared on apps, some hoarded as private coordinates. Companies tout tech fixes, biodegradable panels, non-entangling designs, escape hatches for turtles. Those help. So does switching to FAD-free sets that target free schools. But FAD-free is harder. It takes more fuel, more search, more skill. It also brings fewer juveniles and less bycatch. That's good science. It's expensive business. Meanwhile, the label stays clean because the standard was never ecosystem safe. It was don't set on dolphins and no observed dolphin deaths. and can be dolphin-safe and still trace back to sets that hold up dead sharks. A school district can check a box while a reef 1,000 miles away is sawed by a drifting raft they'll never know existed. The trade-off sits in the fine print consumers never see, avoiding one harm by shifting into another. Fisheries managers try to cap the damage. Some regional bodies limit the number of active FADs per vessel, set seasonal closures, and require non-entangling materials. Compliance varies. Enforcement is thin. A captain who loses a FAD can deploy another. The old one becomes someone else's problem. When storms kick, hundreds can break free. A month later, a beach on an atoll looks like a hardware store exploded. There are bright spots. Poland-line fisheries, though smaller in scale, land tuna with near-zero bycatch and no ghost gear legacy. Handline fleets do the same. Purse-Seiners that commit to FAD-free programs take a hit on predictability and make up for it in credibility. Some retailers pay a premium for those fish and put it on the label. Not enough do. Price still rules most supermarket shelves. Private label cans squeeze margins until practice is flat. A procurement manager stares at a spreadsheet and sees cents, not sharks. Here's where the semantics circle back. Dolphin-Safe lowered visible dolphin deaths in specific waters. That matters. It also pushed fleets to a tool that hides its harm under another kind of convenience. If you ask a shopper, do you want Dolphin-Safe? They'll say yes every time. If you ask, do you want tuna caught away from dolphins but with more sharks and juveniles in the net? The pause would be longer. The people closest to the water don't need the pause. A crewman hauling a silkie by the tail knows the cost in his hands. An island kid stepping over a beached raft knows it in her toes. The choice isn't dolphins versus nothing. It's dolphins versus everything else that gathers in the shadow of a man-made raft. The label never asked you to think about the shadow. And while these choices play out at sea, courtrooms and trade panels keep arguing over words. On the water, words don't cut net. Decisions do. Lawsuits, labels, and the meaning of safe. While fads multiplied at sea, the real fight over safe moved into courtrooms and trade panels. The same word that soothed shoppers became a legal trigger. Plaintiffs walked in holding cans and expectations. Governments walked in holding statutes and trade rules. Judges reached for dictionaries and decades of policy. In the United States, consumer lawsuits argued a straightforward point. When a label says dolphin-safe, people think no dolphins were harmed. Not fewer, not targeted. Safe, companies replied with the statute's precision. The DPCIA doesn't promise zero harm, it sets conditions. No intentional sets on dolphins, and if observed, no dolphin deaths in the sets that supplied that tuna. Courts didn't rewrite the law. They weighed whether packaging and marketing created a net impression that went beyond what the statute guaranteed. Some claims faltered because the brand's disclosures matched the legal standard. Others survived long enough to force tighter wording or clearer qualifiers. The takeaway wasn't a headline win or loss. It was a quiet message to marketers. Don't let the halo outpace the rule. Across the Atlantic of policy, the WTO disputes pressed a different lever. Mexico said the U.S. label discriminated by imposing stringent verification in the eastern tropical Pacific while allowing looser proof elsewhere, effectively blocking Mexican tuna that used monitored dolphin sets while letting other fleets slide under captain statements. Panels listened, ruled, and told Washington to even out the playing field. The U.S. tightened things in 2012 and again in 2016, expanding documentary and verification demands outside the ETP, requiring risk-based checks and bolstering NOAA oversight. Consumer protection stayed the stated aim. Equal treatment became the condition for keeping it. Meanwhile, in appellate briefs and agency findings, another argument ran under the surface. What does the public think safe means? Agencies leaned on surveys and legislative history to say the label signals a specific practice, not zero mortality across the ocean. Activists said you can't beat plain language. Safe means safe. Judges tried to split the distance. They upheld stricter verification while noting that nothing in the statute required the word to reflect absolute absence of harm. In effect, the courts protected the architecture without endorsing the everyday inference shoppers made in aisles. Companies adapted. Some kept their original bright line, no intentional sets on dolphins anywhere for US-bound cans, because shifting now would torch decades of trust. Others leaned on multi-tier labels and third-party badges, stacking Dolphin-Safe with sustainability seals. That layering solved a marketing problem and created a semantic one. When a can displays 3 ovals, a checkmark, and a globe, the practical meaning blurs. Each mark covers a slice. Together, they feel like a blanket. Consumers don't parse jurisdictional nuance when they're late for pickup after work. In depositions, procurement managers explain supply choreography. Catch from a monitored ETP trip goes one direction. Catch from a low-coverage region goes another. Documents are matched to destination markets. Nothing illegal there. It's the logic of global trade. But it's also how a label built for one harm travels with fish that carry others. Courts don't solve that. They referee whether claims match rules. The semantic trap kept snapping shut. Safe isn't a scientific term. It's a feeling backed by a threshold. In chemicals, you set allowable exposure. In cars, you set crash standards. In tuna, Congress set a fishing behavior rule and a verification scheme. The public heard a promise bigger than both. That gap fed fresh lawsuits, more careful ad copy, and periodic agency tweaks that tried to harmonize trade fairness with consumer clarity. Mexico kept pushing at Geneva, arguing that equal verification still hid a structural bias. The ETP's method was scrutinized more because it was visible by design, not because it was worse after reforms. The U.S. pointed to observer coverage numbers and the need to police high-risk fisheries harder. Panels asked for symmetry. NOAA issued new comparability findings and tightened import restrictions on fleets with weak monitoring. Strict on paper, fragile in practice. Because enforcement funding never matched the scope of the sea. Here's the irony. The courtroom wins that preserved the label's integrity also locked in its narrowness. By defending a definition tied to intent and observed mortality, the system kept the promise targeted, not total. That's defensible law and awkward storytelling. It's how you get a can that's truthful under statute and misleading under gut instinct. Behind the litigation, brands rolled out campaigns showing dolphins leaping at sunset, skippers smiling at rails, and words like responsible and sustainable tucked near the seal. They weren't lying, they were curating. The law let them. The market rewarded them. And the ocean kept dealing with the parts of safe the word never covered. Corporate greenwashing versus real reform. The court fights left a vacuum that marketing rushed to fill. If Dolphin-Safe covered one slice, the rest could be draped with new seals, MSC blue fish, ISSF participation badges, company scorecards with greens and yellows that looked like traffic lights for conscience. A can that once carried a single promise now wore a collage. Each mark meant something. Together, they suggested everything. Inside boardrooms, sustainability became a line item with a budget and a calendar. Companies funded solutions that fit their supply chains, research grants on non-entangling FADs, pilot projects for biodegradable panels, workshops on best practice releases. The playbook was familiar: shape the fixes you can live with, then showcase the progress you already plan to make. An MSC certification on a Purse-Seine fishery meant it passed a bar set by auditors using criteria that weighed stock health and management, not a zero bycatch ideal. ISSF, created by major brands, didn't certify. It convened, published resolutions, and nudged fleets toward voluntary commitments. Participation looked like compliance. Compliance looked like reform. Get close and the edges show. Independent audits sometimes aren't fully independent. The money flows from the industry to the certification body to the auditor who returns to the same clients next year. Objectivity is protected by walls on paper and professionalism in practice, but the incentives aren't clean. A fishery seeking a stamp funds the assessment that decides if it gets the stamp. When critics point out the loop, the answer is process, peer review, public comment, corrective action plans. Those matter. They also move at the speed of meetings while nets move at the speed of diesel. Meanwhile, there are real wins worth naming. Some fleets switched to non-entangling FADs, eliminating the loose mesh that drowned turtles. Circle hooks on long lines reduced deep hooking of turtles and billfish. Best practice shark release training up survival odds on deck. Medina panel refinements and rolling backdowns lowered entanglement risk for dolphins in monitored waters. A handful of large retailers wrote procurement policies that pay premiums for FAD-free Purse-Seine or Poland line catch, and they enforce them with audits that check vessel lists and trip data, not just brochures. Those cases prove a point. When buyers tie money to verified practice, behavior shifts, but scale stalls where cost begins. Poland line is clean, traceable, and labor-intensive. It can't flood a global commodity pipeline without price hikes. FAD-free sets are possible at scale, but they cut predictability and raise costs. A brand can build a premium line around those fish. It can't flip an entire private label category that competes on pennies. Procurement departments still open with price, then ask for optics that don't break the margin. That's how you get cans that carry both a sustainability seal and the cheapest retail price in town. Signals that don't square unless the bar for the seal is reachable without changing the engine that creates the low price. Independent oversight, when truly independent, shifts the ground. Third-party audits that verify trip-level data against observer logs or electronic monitoring create friction that marketing can't smooth. Some programs now require vessel-level transparency, public lists, unique identifiers, and port state measures that cross-check landings against authorizations. Those tools catch fraud. They don't transform incentives by themselves. If a violation leads to a corrective action plan and not a lost market, the lesson is patience, not change. Here, S where the human stories cut through the jargon. An observer calls in a pressured set. The next hitch is a tense galley. A factory worker in a distant processing plant hits production targets that leave no room for slower, better-handled fish. A coastal Poland line crew loses a contract when a supermarket's private label consolidates suppliers to shave 2 cents a can. Sustainability isn't a seal. It's a series of choices that land on people with less leverage than the brand managers who write the copy. Companies know this. Many fund labor audits now tying ethical recruitment and wage checks to environmental promises. That's progress. It also shows the limit of green claims in a fishery built on thin margins. Real reform costs money and time. Greenwashing costs design fees and a press release. So how do you tell the difference? Look for the hard stuff. Gear and area restrictions that reduce catch efficiency, premiums paid and documented to fleets using lower-impact methods, 100% electronic monitoring with independent review and public summaries, vessel lists published and reconciled against regional registries, consequences that bite, suspensions, delistings, lost shelf space when rules break. If you can't see those, you're buying a story. There are brands pushing into that harder lane. They tag cans with QR codes that show vessel names, gear, region, and whether an observer or camera watched the set. They contract for FAD-free or Poland line supply even when the spreadsheet balks. They show their audit scopes, not just their logos. Those aren't stunts, they're signals that someone in procurement won an argument. But the center of the market still runs on volume wrapped in comfort. The labels reassure, the seals stack. The word sustainable floats above a system that shifts harms rather than shrinking them. Reform is possible. Greenwashing is easy. Both live on the same shelf. The next chapter isn't about branding. It's about what the science says the ocean's actually doing while we congratulate ourselves at checkout. What's happening to dolphin populations? Science tried to answer the question the label couldn't. After mortality dropped in the eastern tropical Pacific, did dolphin populations bounce back? Survey planes traced transects over warm water, clicking counters as pods surfaced below. The early hope was simple. Fewer deaths should mean steady recovery. Years passed. The curves didn't climb as expected. Some stocks like northeastern offshore spotted and eastern spinner dolphins showed stalled or sluggish rebounds. The data said better, not back. But to understand why, we need to split death from damage. Observed kills in sets plunged under stricter rules and trained release. But scientists flagged other stressors that don't show up on a tally sheet. Repeated chases may burn energy, scramble feeding, and disrupt nursing. Calves separated in the chaos can be lost without a carcass ever hitting a logbook. Chronic stress changes survival in ways that feel invisible on deck and echo in birth rates years later. You can reduce lethal events and still leave a population winded. Meanwhile, underreporting remains a shadow. In the ETP, observer coverage is strong compared to elsewhere, which is exactly why its numbers are more credible. Even so, not every incident is captured. A night set, a torn net, a fast backdown with poor visibility. These are places where the record thins. Scientists hedge with ranges and confidence intervals. Managers ask, are we missing enough to explain the stall? The answer is unsatisfying, maybe some, not all. Genetics added another layer. What looked like large, continuous populations turned out to hold distinct subpopulations with their own histories and vulnerabilities. If a regionally small group took the brunt during the peak years, its road back is longer, even if the broader species looks stable. Slow breeding species compound the lag. Many dolphins have long lives, late maturity, and low reproductive rates. You can't push a slow clock. Outside the ETP, the picture is blurrier still. Observer coverage is patchy, monitoring methods vary, and many fleets don't interact with dolphins the same way. That doesn't mean zero impact, it means sparse data. Researchers call them data deserts. Without eyes on decks and standardized surveys, you're left inferring from behavior, strandings, and limited acoustic records. It's hard to manage what you can't measure, and hard to fund measurement for places with fewer headlines. One detail keeps circling back. Repeated non-lethal interactions matter. A pod chased and released a dozen times in a season might show no carcasses and still lose ground through fewer surviving calves. Field studies have watched spinner dolphins resting inshore by day, only to be pushed by tourism boats, another stressor layered onto fishing pressure. Add noise, changing prey fields, and warming waters, and you get a stack of not-quite-lethal hits that add up. There are bright data points. Some indicators for certain stocks trend upward, especially where effort shifted, release techniques improved, and sets declined. That's the product of rules with teeth and crews who learn to handle gear better. It's real. But the broader message from scientific reviews is restraint. Mortality reductions were necessary, not sufficient. Recovery is slower than models predicted under simple assumptions. So what now? Researchers ask for three things: keep mortality low and trending lower, measure sublethal effects with better fieldwork, tagging, calf follow studies, energetics, and expand independent monitoring beyond the ETP so we don't fix one room and ignore the hall. Electronic monitoring can help if reviews are independent and comprehensive. Funding must match the scope of the ocean we're asking to heal. For consumers, this is the uncomfortable part. The labels promised targeted a specific harm, and that harm shrank where rules were enforced. Yet the animals we meant to spare aren't all recovering on our timeline. That's not a reason to abandon the gains, it's a reason to tell the truth. Fewer deaths isn't the same as healthy populations. The ocean measures success in calves that survive to calve again, not in marketing milestone. What nobody knew at the start was how long ghosts last, the aftereffects of years when nets closed on lungs. The science says they linger. The question is whether we're willing to fund the work and accept the costs that move a graph, not just a headline. The consumer trap and the $10 billion incentive. By the time Dolphin-Safe became routine on cans, the market had hardened into a habit worth roughly $10 billion a year. Canned tuna sits in a fortress built from Tuesday night dinners, school lunches, and disaster pantries. It wins because it's cheap, shelf-stable, and familiar. Change the story too much, and you don't just risk a campaign, you risk a category. Price is the first gate. Procurement managers at supermarkets open spreadsheets, not ethics manuals. They bid vendors against each other in fractions of a cent. Private label programs double down, demanding huge, steady volume at the lowest possible cost. The label is a compliance checkbox. The number that matters sits in the far-right column. If one supplier can shave 2 cents a can by using fish from high bycatch FAD sets rather than slower, cleaner methods, it's hard to say no when your job is to keep prices low. This is how Dolphin-Safe sustains demand without fixing core harms. It absorbs consumer anxiety at the exact moment a shopper reaches for a can. The oval says, relax, so they do. The purchase goes through. The habit repeats. Behavioral studies have a term for it, moral licensing. A reassuring cue reduces guilt and increases the chance you'll stick with what you were going to do anyway. The industry didn't invent the psychology, but it understood it. Protect the cue and you protect the sale. Meanwhile, the supply chain feeds the comfort loop. Promotions set expectations, 10 for $10, cases stacked under hanging signs. Food banks rely on the price and the protein density. School districts budget for tons. Disaster planners include tuna in emergency kits. Every one of those choices leans on a system that can deliver millions of cans on time, every time. That scale is incompatible with expensive catch unless someone pays more. Mostly they don't. Private label tuna quietly sets the standard. When a retailer owns the brand, it owns the risk. It writes the specs, chooses certifications, and negotiates freight. It also lives and dies on price perception. If the house brand looks expensive next to a national competitor on sale, you lose a customer to another aisle. So specs drift toward the minimum that looks respectable. Dolphin-Safe claim, a sustainability seal may be a QR code. The rest is volume. Consumers aren't villains here, they're busy. A parent late for pickup grabs protein that won't spoil and won't spark a fight at the dinner table. The label gives permission to stop thinking. If you asked that parent to parse FAD-associated juvenile bycatch, you'd get a blank stare. Not because they don't care, because the system was designed so they wouldn't have to. Marketing reinforces the amnesia. A can shows a leaping dolphin and a sunset. Copy says responsibly sourced. The brain fills in the gaps with a story about good boats and careful crews. In reality, the claim might rest on a captain's statement from a fishery with minimal independent monitoring, a FAD set coded non-dolphin by definition, and a certification that weighed stock status more than bycatch. None of that is fraud. It's alignment, words that fit rules that fit margin. The $10B incentive shows up in boardrooms as category protection. You don't let lawsuits or advocacy redefine the product so far that buyers feel exposed at the shelf. You manage risk, you add seals, you sponsor studies that promise incremental improvement without threatening throughput. When a retailer tries a premium, fully verified line, FAD-free, Poland line, 100% electronic monitoring, it often becomes a niche SKU. It sells to the sliver of customers willing to pay more. The rest of the shelf pays the rent. Here's the hard arithmetic. To shift mainstream cans to lower impact methods, you either absorb higher costs or you raise prices. Absorb them and shareholders balk. Raise them and shoppers trade down or walk. Either way, someone with power says no. So the system keeps doing what it does best. Move predictable product with a story that reduces friction. There are exceptions that prove the rule. A national chain ties bonuses to verified sustainability metrics, not just margin. A buyer insists on FAD-free for house brand like tuna, pays a premium and markets the difference. Sales hold because the chain absorbs the cost elsewhere. But those moves require leadership willing to treat seafood as more than a commodity. Most don't. Consumers say they want transparency. They click on QR codes once, then life takes over. Unless the info on that code changes a price, a taste, or a feeling, it becomes wallpaper. The only transparency that consistently moves markets is the kind tied to procurement decisions upstream. A retailer requiring 100% monitoring, publishing vessel lists, and rejecting trips without proof. That's not a consumer nudge. That's a contract term. So the trap isn't that shoppers made a bad choice. It's that the system gave them a comfort word and then structured every incentive to keep them choosing the same can. Dolphin-Safe helped fewer dolphin deaths where the method was worst. But as a market device, it also stabilized a category that offloads new harms elsewhere. $10 billion of habit doesn't change because we wish it would. It changes when the money moves, when verification is non-negotiable, and when the word on the label stops doing all the ethical heavy lifting by itself. Chapter 12, Paths Forward. What would honest look like? If the problem is a promise that outgrew its truth, then honesty means putting the messy parts on the can. Not as a brochure, as facts you can't miss. Start with transparent labels that say the things that actually decide harm, gear type, region, and whether an independent witness watched the set. Purse-Seine FAD-free Western Pacific 100% M reviewed by a third party. Or Longline Central Pacific 20% observer coverage. That's not marketing, that's disclosure. Next, make verification real. Electronic monitoring works when it's complete and independent. Cameras on every vessel, hard drives or encrypted uploads handled by a neutral data host, footage sampled to statistically valid rates, or reviewed fully for high-risk sets by analysts who don't report to the company they're grading. Publish aggregate results, bycatch rates, interaction counts, compliance flag. Not names and faces on Untold, just the numbers that matter, broken down by fleet, gear, and area. If a fishery wants access to premium markets, it accepts the rig and the review. Gear shifts are the fastest way to cut harm without waiting for culture to change. Poland line and handline fisheries already prove the point. Low bycatch, traceable supply, coastal jobs. They won't feed the entire category, but they can anchor a verified tier that isn't boutique. Purse-Seiners can commit to FAD-free sets for a guaranteed share of their trips. That commitment only sticks if buyers pay a premium tied to delivered proof. Trip IDs, vessel names, M-logs, observer reports when present. FAD-free can't be a season-long average. It has to be a trip-level claim. For FADs that remain, set hard design rules, fully non-entangling, biodegradable where feasible, and tagged with unique IDs linked to vessel registries. Require recovery plans and fees that fund retrieval, with credits for devices recovered before they ghost. Port states can enforce it. No landings or bunkers without FAD logs reconciled against buoy IDs and movement data. Lose too many, pay. Repeat it, pause your access. It's gear stewardship, not a press release. Procurement policies decide whether any of this leaves the whiteboard. Retailers should flip the order. Minimum verification first, price second. Write contracts that require 100% M or 100% human observers in high-risk fisheries, publish vessel lists quarterly, and bar transshipment at sea unless monitored by cameras with independent review. Pay premiums for pole and line, handline, and FAD-free Purse-Seine and say how much. If you won't pay more, say that too. Silence is a choice. Policy can harden the floor. Mandate M across industrial fleets within exclusive economic zones and for fleets seeking import access. Set deadlines, then tie import eligibility to proof of coverage and independent analysis. Close known high-risk areas seasonally when juvenile ratios spike. Make exemptions only for fleets meeting the strictest verification. Fund the science that tracks sublethal effects on dolphins, tagging, calf-follow studies, energetics, and make that funding part of access agreements. If you fish here, you pay into the data that keeps it honest. There's a labor piece we can't leave out. Observers are vulnerable. Give them protected whistleblower channels that bypass the vessel, guaranteed rapid response when contact is lost, and insurance that covers families if the worst happens. Link fleet eligibility to observer safety protocols verified at port, working sat phones, private cabins, secure data lockers, and training for captains that isn't a checkbox. If an observer disappears, suspend the vessel's market access until an independent inquiry clears it. Cameras reduce risk. They don't replace a human's judgment or safety net. Honesty also means calling time on a word. Safe sounds absolute and wild-caught is. Replace it with specific claims that match reality. No intentional sets on dolphins independently verified. FAD-free third-party reviewed. Pole and line vessel listed. If brands won't drop safe, regulators can require a qualifier next to it that doesn't hide in 6-point font. The point isn't to punish language, it's to stop it from doing work evidence should do. Some will say this kills the category. It doesn't, it reprices it. A can that includes verification and lower impact gear will cost more. That's the honest math. Let cheap cans exist only if they meet minimum monitoring and publish their bycatch summaries. Put the numbers on a public dashboard tied to barcodes, so when a journalist checks, the data lines up. If the numbers look bad, fishery managers have a target to fix. If they look good, buyers have a reason to trust. Meanwhile, build transition lanes. Governments and retailers can create pooled premiums, funds that underwrite the first 2 years of M and gear changes for fleets that commit to FAD-free quotas or pole and line expansion. Require milestones and clawbacks. Don't strand coastal crews. Pair environmental goals with labor protections. No forced labor, clean recruitment, contracts in languages crews understand, and real audits that check vessel conditions, not just paperwork. None of this works if it stays voluntary. The fleets already doing the hard things will carry the cost while competitors undercut them. Level the field with import rules, port state measures, and retailer specs that don't blink when a cheap offer lands on the desk. The ocean is full of places to hide a shortcut. Markets shouldn't be one of them. So what would honest look like on a shelf? A row of cans that stop pretending one word solves the scene. A scan code that shows who, how, and where. A price that reflects the trade-offs plainly. And behind it, contracts, cameras, and people protected enough to tell the truth when the net closes. The moral math. We've been following a label across oceans. Now we have to talk about what it asks us to accept. Industrial fishing isn't a fairy tale. It's harm managed by rules, people, and money. The word safe flattened that into a comfort we could buy. The moral math brings the edges back. Start with the ethics of less harm. In the eastern tropical Pacific, intentional sets on dolphins dropped under pressure. Trained releases and observers cut lethal outcomes. That's good, but less didn't equal none and the toll moved. Fewer dolphin deaths came with more FAD sets elsewhere, drawing in sharks, turtles, and juvenile tuna that won't spawn. We didn't erase damage, we traded one ledger for another. The honest question is it safe? It's whose harm did we lower, and whose did we raise? Trade-offs get personal when you attach names. A spinner calf lost in a chase never hits a statistic. A silky shark pulled tail first over a rail does. A juvenile big eye in a FAD set becomes a missing adult 3 years from now, a number that shows up when a coastal handline crew wonders why fish are thinner on the grounds. The label never introduced those people to each other. The fishery did. Honesty over comfort means saying the quiet part out loud. A can of wild-caught tuna is a product of triage. Crews work fast in heat and spray. Captains juggle quotas, weather, and price. Observers, when present, take notes that carry consequences. A brand turns all of that into a neat claim the size of a postage stamp. Somewhere in between, someone's risk got smoothed out so a shopper wouldn't have to feel it. And there's another ledger, labor. Cheap tuna runs on thin margins that don't just press the ocean, they press people. Reports of debt bondage, withheld wages, violent discipline, and deaths at sea aren't a side story. They're the price of shaving cents when the supply chain stretches across flags and jurisdictions. You can't call a product responsible if the deck it came from wasn't. That's not a slogan problem. It's a procurement problem. So what does an ethical choice look like when perfection isn't on offer? It looks like specificity. Gear and region matter more than adjectives. Pole and line and handline reduce bycatch and create coastal jobs with safer rhythms. Purse-Seine can be better when it's FAD-free and watched by cameras or people who can speak freely. Longline can be less lethal with circle hooks, weak hooks for sharks, and handling protocols that treat released life as something more than waste. These aren't abstractions. They're settings you can dial and verify. Verification is where morality meets math. A promise without proof is comfort. Proof without consequence is theater. If a fleet breaks rules and keeps selling, the market told the truth and then looked away. If a fleet installs cameras, publishes vessel lists, and still loses access when data show harm, the system remembered what standard means. Ethics cost money for monitoring, time for training, premiums for slower gear, insurance and safety for observers and crews. If the price on the shelf denies that cost, the difference came out of the ocean or a human being. There's a humility we owe the science. Dolphin populations that didn't rebound as expected remind us that sublethal harm lingers. Shark declines under FAD regimes remind us that a fix over here can break something over there. The moral stance, then, is iterative. Declare the trade-offs, measure them honestly, and change course when the data say you missed. Don't outsource conscience to a word you wrote 30 years ago and never revised. And there's a courage we owe the truth. If safe misleads, retire it. Replace it with claims that speak plainly. No intentional sets on dolphins, independently verified, FAD-free reviewed, pole and line vessel listed, 100% electronic monitoring with third-party analysis. Give people the information that lets them decide what to endorse and what to fund. Some will still choose the cheapest can. Many won't if they can see what their money does. The last piece is solidarity. Coastal communities that fish cleanly shouldn't be priced out by fleets that push harm off the label. Observers shouldn't face a life-or-death choice to keep notes honest. Crews shouldn't trade safety for speed. Consumers shouldn't be forced into a false innocence. The moral math only works when the sums are visible and the burden is shared by those with the margins to carry it. We began with hesitation on a deck and a word on a can. The deck was real. The word was a wish. The way forward is to stop wishing and start counting, loudly, publicly, and with the nerve to change when the numbers say we should. The label calmed our conscience. The ocean kept the bill. If you want honesty on your plate, demand labels that say how, where, and who, with proof that strangers can check. Subscribe for more untold stories behind everyday products, and watch our deep dive on the food labels that fooled America. Your next click funds better reporting, and your next purchase can fund better fishing if you ask the right questions.